Senator Durbin.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. Reflect on the fact that as we meet today, there are thousands, literally tens of thousands of men and women in the United States who got up this morning and put on a badge or picked up their briefcase and went to work to make sure that we would be safe. They are in law enforcement all across the United States of America. They count on this system of justice, as we all do, to give us not only safety in our homes, but also fairness when it comes to treatment by the government. The man we are discussing this morning seeks to be the #1 law enforcement enforcer of the United States of America, the Attorney General of the United States, the highest-ranking law enforcement position. And what have we learned in the last few weeks when it comes to Todd Blanche? We have learned that simply his word is not enough for most of us, not even for some of my Republican friends. Even his word under oath is not credible enough. We have a demand by colleagues that I support, a demand that Mr. Blanche, when it comes to important promises to the American people, put it in writing. Put it in writing. And in fact, he did.
What happens when the man being considered for one of the most powerful law enforcement positions in America gets accused of contradicting himself under oath? That is exactly the question being raised after Senator Dick Durbin unloaded on Todd Blanche in a dramatic Senate hearing. But here is where this story gets even more interesting. If you are a conservative, you should not automatically dismiss Durbin simply because he is a Democrat, and you should not automatically believe every accusation simply because it is aimed at Donald Trump. The standard has to be the same for everybody. If Blanche told the truth, he should be able to defend himself with evidence. If Durbin's allegations are accurate, then they deserve serious scrutiny. And if the accusations are exaggerated or politically motivated, Blanche deserves the opportunity to expose that too. This is supposed to be about the rule of law, and that means the rules cannot change depending on which political team you support. Welcome back to the Blue Brief. Before we get into this explosive confrontation, make sure you hit that like button, subscribe to the Blue Brief, and turn on notifications, because we are breaking down the moments the mainstream political conversation would rather you ignore. Now let's get into what actually happened.
Mr. Chairman, the political escapade of the last week has made it clearer than ever that Todd Blanche has no business serving as our nation's chief law enforcement officer. 2 Republican members of this committee said they would not vote for Mr. Blanche unless the J6 cop beater slush fund was permanently and irrevocably terminated. And of course, these 2 members, and I support their position, said to Mr. Blanche, you have to put it in writing if you're going to say those words. President Trump responded, as we might have guessed, as he always does, by doubling down on his position and personally attacking our colleagues. To state the obvious, Mr. Blanche's statement on the slush fund and the IRS immunity agreement are not signed by the parties to the settlement agreement and are therefore unenforceable. The parties could still sue to enforce the agreement, and the cop beaters fund can easily be revived with a new order from the Department of Justice 15 minutes after Mr. Blanche is confirmed as Attorney General. Indeed, the president himself has loudly telegraphed that's his plan. This is the exact issue that the 2 senators identified as a basis for their objection to his nomination, Blanche's nomination. To my Republican colleagues, you gave Mr. Blanche the benefit of the doubt when you supported his nomination to be Deputy Attorney General. 17 months later, there is no doubt where his loyalty will lie. Take a look at this promise, unprecedented, I believe, in the history of the United States, that somehow Mr. Blanche engineered an agreement, an understanding, a settlement, you name it, that said that Donald Trump will never be held responsible for any violations of tax crimes before the date of this document that was signed. Saying that the president can commit any crime in the tax code and not be held personally responsible? Does that sound like he is being held to an accountability that we all expect of every single American? Instead of serving the American people and upholding the rule of law and the Constitution, Mr. Blanche has aided and abetted the most corrupt administration in the history of the United States. Prior to this hearing, Mr. Blanche told me, quote, made a mistake, close quote, by creating the January 6th slush fund. Where did he say it? In my office, with witnesses, my staff, to what I'm about to say. When I asked him about this under oath, Mr. Blanche falsely claimed that he never made this statement. That's not true. Mr. Blanche's willingness to casually lie under oath about a statement he made in a room full of witnesses shows the lengths he will go to avoid offending President Trump. Why doesn't he want to concede he made a mistake? We all do that from time to time, right? No, no, no. Manly MAGA leaders do not admit a mistake or use the word sorry. So he was held accountable by the president. Mr. Blanche has claimed he recused himself from matters involving President Trump in his personal capacity. Yet he personally signed the agreement releasing President Trump, his family, and businesses from tax liability. When asked how DOJ justified the slush fund's outrageous $1.776 billion price tag, Mr. Blanche refused to answer. He shows contempt for this committee and for our history by refusing to admit that the sum was chosen to signal support for the January 6th rioters, and many of us remember when they attacked and invaded the Capitol. Those rioters shamelessly invoked 1776 to compare themselves to American revolutionaries. Give me a break. Mr. Blanche told me that a ruling against the settlement was, quote, a hit piece personally directed at him. This is no surprise coming from the man who declared that the Justice Department is, quote, at war, close quote, with the courts. These are not the words of someone who would serve our nation as a top law enforcement official. One of Mr. Blanche's first acts as Deputy Attorney General was to issue a memo gutting DOJ's crypto crime enforcement, which allowed the president to rake in $1.4 billion in a crypto windfall last year. Even as
Senator Dick Durbin opened his attack by focusing on one issue above almost everything else: credibility. Durbin argued that Todd Blanche had previously told him privately that he had made a mistake involving the controversial January 6th-related fund. According to Durbin, that conversation happened in his office with staff and witnesses present. But when Blanche was later questioned about the statement under oath, Durbin says Blanche denied ever making it. That is a serious accusation. But here's the conservative perspective. An accusation is not the same thing as proof. If there are witnesses, notes, recordings, emails, or other documentation supporting Durbin's account, then those pieces of evidence should be examined. If there is evidence contradicting Durbin's version, that evidence should be examined too. Because this is not supposed to be a courtroom where political theater replaces evidence. And conservatives should be particularly careful here. For years, Republicans have complained that Washington's political establishment applies one standard to Democrats and another standard to Republicans. If we genuinely believe in equal justice, then we cannot demand accountability only when the person being accused belongs to the other party. The same standard has to be applied to everybody. Durbin then moved into another controversial issue, the January 6th-related fund. According to the transcript, 2 Republican senators had demanded assurances that the fund would be permanently terminated before supporting Blanche. Durbin argues that the written assurances were not sufficient because, in his view, the relevant parties had not formally signed them. Now, that is an important distinction. A politician saying something publicly is one thing. A legally binding agreement with enforceable obligations is another. And this is where Washington needs more transparency, not less. If the fund is terminated, show the American people the official documentation. If it can be revived, explain exactly how. If it cannot be revived, demonstrate why. Don't ask Americans to simply trust politicians. Show them the paperwork. That brings us to perhaps the most explosive part of Durbin's presentation, his allegations surrounding Trump's tax liability. Durbin claimed that Blanche helped engineer an agreement that could protect Donald Trump, his family, and his businesses from certain tax liabilities. Those are enormous claims, and they should not simply be repeated as established facts without examining the underlying agreement, its legal language, and the circumstances surrounding it. but the broader principle Durbin raised is one that conservatives should actually understand very well. No president should be above the law. Period. The Constitution does not say there is one justice system for ordinary Americans and another for presidents. If Donald Trump broke a tax law, then the question should be whether the evidence proves it and what the law requires. If he did not break the law, then prosecutors should not manufacture a case simply because they dislike him. That is what equal justice means, and conservatives should demand that exactly. Durbin then attacked Blanche over what he described as a conflict between Blanche's claimed recusal from certain Trump matters and his alleged involvement in agreements benefiting Trump.
Even as Americans reported billions of dollars in cryptocurrency fraud losses, the president did just fine, thank you. Meanwhile, Mr. Blanche still has, through his children and grandchildren, $150,000 in crypto assets. Last year, under Mr. Blanche's leadership, more than 1,000 FBI personnel were pulled off key law enforcement priorities. What was a higher priority than their oath that they've taken to uphold the law? They were directed to flag Epstein records and look for any mention of Donald Trump. Mr. Blanche refused to tell me who gave this order, but former Attorney General Bondi made it clear, saying Blanche was, quote, in charge of the Epstein files. And when the Epstein Files Transparency Act forced DOJ to release the files, not only did the department delay reviewing and producing it, it recklessly failed to redact hundreds of survivors' personal information, victimizing them all over again. And they testified before this committee under oath to that fact. Meanwhile, the names of powerful Epstein cronies remain protected, in clear violation of the law. When scrutiny of the Epstein cover-up intensified, Mr. Blanche participated in secret meetings in the White House Situation Room, of all places, to strategize about protecting Trump, not Epstein survivors. Mr. Blanche volunteered to interview convicted sex trafficker Ghislaine Maxwell, a transparent attempt to exonerate President Trump. Just days later, she was transferred to a minimum security camp, which is unheard of, unprecedented, for serious sex offenders like her. Mr. Blanche agreed to meet with Epstein survivors after months of pleas, only when his nomination was in jeopardy and a member of this committee said he wouldn't consider voting for him unless he met with these survivors. He finally met with them for almost an hour. As one survivor, Dan Obinsky, who testified before this committee, said, the meeting was a box-checking exercise. Mr. Blanche refused to take accountability for redaction failures, and he wouldn't commit to following their suggested investigative leads. It is clear that Mr. Blanche hopes to sweep the Epstein scandal under the rug. I thank those survivors for the courage they showed in this room today and around the country for continuing to advocate for survivors and speak truth to power. Mr. Blanche has played a key role in terminating thousands of Department of Justice officials. The chairman talked about his law enforcement record. Let's look at it. The goal is clear. Replace these DOJ officials with unqualified MAGA loyalists who will rubber stamp President Trump's corruption. Under Mr. Blanche's leadership, more than 16,000 employees have left the department. 16,000 employees have left the Department of Justice, including more than a fourth of its attorneys. Many have been fired for declining to initiate vindictive prosecutions or refusing to follow unethical orders, like career immigration litigator Erez Ruvani, who refused an order from Mr. Blanche's former law partner, Emil Bove, to lie in federal court. Mr. Blanche bragged about firing career law enforcement officials simply because they were assigned to investigate President Trump's misconduct. Mr. Blanche is responsible for the department losing thousands of years of law enforcement and national security expertise. This makes all of us less safe. Consider this quote. On Blanche's watch, the Trump DOJ has pursued an unabashedly vindictive agenda of leveraging the government's awesome prosecutorial powers in its public trust against the president's political enemies. These aren't my words. This is the conclusion of the National Review, the leading conservative publication founded by William Buckley. This isn't about Democrats versus Republicans. This is about rule of law versus lawlessness. The Attorney General is supposed to be the people's lawyer. Department of Justice should work on behalf of all the American people. Mr. Blanche continues to operate as the president's personal lawyer, treating the Justice Department like a law firm serving one client, the president. The president has made it clear he plans to keep Mr. Blanche in place as acting Attorney General, a damning comment on his capacity to honorably serve in this role. This committee does not need to legitimate Mr. Blanche's appointment by providing our consent. I yield.
Again, the question should be simple. What exactly did Blanche recuse himself from? What did he personally handle? What did he sign? What authority did he exercise? And what do the official documents actually say? Those questions deserve answers based on facts rather than political slogans. Then the hearing moved into another controversial issue, the $1.776 billion associated with the January 6th related fund. Durbin questioned why that specific amount was chosen and suggested that the number was symbolic because the rioters referenced 1776. Whether that interpretation is correct or not, the underlying question is legitimate. Taxpayers deserve to know exactly how enormous government expenditures are calculated and justified. If billions of dollars are involved, there should be documentation, there should be accountability, and there should be a paper trail. No administration gets a blank check. The transcript then turns toward cryptocurrency enforcement. Durbin criticized Blanche's record at the Justice Department and connected policy changes involving cryptocurrency enforcement to financial benefits involving President Trump. That's another area where conservatives should demand something very simple: follow the money and follow the documents. If someone benefited financially from a government policy, determine what happened. Who made the decision? When was it made? Who benefited? Was there a legitimate policy justification? Were conflicts properly disclosed? Those are fair questions regardless of whether the person involved is a Democrat, Republican, Trump supporter, or Trump critic. And then we reach the Epstein controversy. This is where the political temperature goes through the roof. Durbin accused the Justice Department of mishandling Epstein records and raised questions about how personnel were assigned to review those materials, including whether references to Donald Trump received special attention. He also criticized the department over the handling of victims' personal information. Now, regardless of political party, there is one thing that should be completely uncontroversial. Epstein's victims deserve protection. Their privacy should matter. Their personal information should not be carelessly exposed, and powerful people should not receive special treatment simply because they have political connections. If the government possesses records concerning serious crimes, the American people deserve transparency consistent with protecting victims and legitimate investigative information. That is not a Republican principle. That is not a Democrat principle. That is an American principle. But there is another side of this story that deserves attention. Durbin's presentation paints Blanche as essentially nothing more than Donald Trump's personal attorney. That is a powerful political argument, but conservatives should ask whether the evidence actually supports that conclusion. Blanche has supporters who would argue that he is carrying out the administration's agenda, removing what they see as politicized elements of the Justice Department and restoring control over an agency that conservatives have accused of targeting political opponents. That perspective cannot simply be dismissed. At the same time, political loyalty cannot become a substitute for professional independence. The Attorney General has enormous authority. The Department of Justice has the power to prosecute people, investigate organizations, enforce federal law, and influence the lives of millions of Americans. That power must be used carefully. If Blanche becomes Attorney General, conservatives should want him to be loyal to the Constitution first, the law second, and any president third. That's the standard, and frankly, Republicans should demand it. Because imagine if the political parties switched places. Imagine a Democratic president had an attorney general accused of protecting the president from investigations, dismissing concerns about conflicts of interest, and refusing to answer difficult questions. Would conservatives accept that? Probably not. So conservatives should not accept it from their own side either. But there is an equally important warning for Democrats. Do not assume that every allegation against Donald Trump automatically proves wrongdoing. We've watched politically explosive accusations dominate Washington before, only for parts of the story to become much more complicated once documents and evidence emerged. So the solution is not blind loyalty to Trump, and it is not blind trust in Democrats. The solution is evidence. The most powerful moment in Durbin's argument is therefore not necessarily the most dramatic accusation. It is the question of credibility. Can the American people trust the person who may become the nation's top federal law enforcement officer? That is the question senators should be answering. Not, do you like Trump? Not, do you hate Trump? Not, are you a Democrat? Not, are you a Republican? Can this man enforce the law fairly? Can he tell the truth under oath? Can he separate personal loyalty from professional responsibility? Can he protect victims while respecting due process? Can he investigate wrongdoing regardless of who committed it? And perhaps most importantly, can Americans trust the Department of Justice again? Because that institution belongs to the American people. It doesn't belong to Donald Trump. It doesn't belong to Dick Durbin. It doesn't belong to Democrats. It doesn't belong to Republicans. It belongs to the country. And if Todd Blanche ultimately takes the job, conservatives should be among the first people demanding that he prove he understands that. The rule of law only works when everybody believes the rules apply to everybody. That means Republicans don't get a special exemption, Democrats don't get one either, and the president doesn't get one either. So yes, Durbin's accusations deserve attention, but they also deserve verification. Show us the documents, show us the witnesses.